Alpha King confronts Omega before the Judgment Pyre as the flames rise to defend her instead. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. Caroline Whitmore, once a beloved member of the Silverpine Pack, now found herself standing before the Judgment Pyre. The flames flickered, casting shadows on her pale face, as a hush fell over the gathering crowd. The scent of burning wood mixed with the sharp air of the cold evening, and she could feel the weight of every eye upon her. They had called her weak, pathetic even, for being an Omega who could never shift, a wolf without a true pack. Tonight, it was her turn to be cast aside. The voices of the pack members echoed in her mind, their mockery still ringing in her ears. She's nothing. Just a broken Omega, they'd whispered behind her back, and now, they were finally speaking it to her face. Caroline stood tall despite the humiliation, her heart pounding in her chest, but her resolve was clear. She would not break in front of them, not even as the flames of judgment rose higher, their heat licking the air around her. She had been rejected time and time again, pushed to the edge of this moment. But deep inside, there was a flicker of defiance, a silent vow to rise above this pain. Her eyes were drawn to the fire, its glow reflecting in her determined gaze. In the distance, she saw a figure emerge from the shadows. The crowd fell silent, sensing the arrival of someone far more powerful than any of them. The Alpha King, Nathaniel Thornridge, strode forward with an air of authority that sent a ripple of unease through the onlookers. His tall, broad frame seemed to fill the space as he approached Caroline, his silver eyes locking onto hers. His presence was a storm, fierce and commanding, and yet, in the midst of the chaos surrounding her, he was a strange beacon of calm. Caroline felt the sudden weight of his gaze, his eyes searching her as though he could see into the very core of her soul. You stand here, broken and abandoned, Nathaniel's voice broke through the silence, steady and clear. But I will not let them break you further. His words were like a shield, protecting her from the judgment that had once seemed inevitable. The crowd gasped as he stepped closer, his powerful figure now standing beside her, not as a ruler ready to condemn, but as a protector ready to shield her from the flames. As the Alpha King's hand reached out, Caroline's heart skipped a beat, her breath caught in her throat. The flames around them flickered higher, as if responding to his command. The heat became intense, yet instead of overwhelming them, it seemed to bow to his presence. Nathaniel Thornridge had come to her defense, and in that moment, she realized that everything she had suffered was not the end, but the beginning of a new chapter. The flames rose to protect her instead of consuming her, as if the very forces of nature themselves were bending to the will of the Alpha King. The flames continued to rise, their orange tongues licking the air as though they were alive, dancing to the rhythm of the night. Caroline's heart raced in her chest, but now, it wasn't out of fear. It was something else, something she couldn't quite name. Beside her, the Alpha King stood tall, his presence alone enough to keep the judgment flames from reaching her. His silver eyes were locked onto hers, calm and intense, as if he could command the very elements themselves. His hand, still outstretched, seemed to draw the fire back, keeping it at bay with nothing more than his will. The crowd watched in stunned silence, murmuring in disbelief at the unexpected turn of events. No one dared move, not even to breathe too loudly, as the Alpha King's shadow seemed to stretch and protect Caroline. She could feel the warmth of the fire, but it was not the kind of heat that burned. It was the kind that enveloped her, wrapping her in a protective shield. Caroline had never imagined that such power could be wielded so effortlessly by a man, especially not one like Nathaniel Thornridge. The Alpha King, who had built his reputation on ruthlessness, had just placed himself between her and her shame. She felt a strange comfort in that. In the stillness of the moment, Nathaniel finally spoke, his voice low and steady, yet it resonated with the authority that only he possessed. This is not your fate, Caroline Whitmore, he said, his voice reaching every corner of the gathering. You are not the broken Omega they see. You are mine, and I will not let them define you. The words rang in her ears, and for the first time in her life, Caroline allowed herself to believe them. She had always been the one cast aside, the one ignored and rejected. But now, with the Alpha King standing beside her, she was something more. She was his. The crowd was still silent, but their murmurs had changed. Some were fearful, others were confused, and some even seemed to be questioning the power of the Alpha King's declaration. Caroline turned her gaze back to him, meeting his silver eyes once more. There was no mockery in them, no judgment. Only a quiet, unwavering confidence. It was as if Nathaniel knew exactly what he was doing, exactly what he was offering her. A future. A place by his side. She could hardly believe it. She had spent so long in the shadows, so long hoping for a chance to prove her worth, but she never imagined it would come from someone like him. The Alpha King, the ruler of the Northern Territories, the man who had crushed countless enemies, was now choosing her. Caroline felt a tremor run through her body. It wasn't fear, but something else. Something powerful. She could feel the weight of his words, and with that weight came a strange sense of belonging. For the first time, she didn't feel like a nobody. She didn't feel like the Omega who would always be overlooked. She felt like she mattered. As if sensing her thoughts, Nathaniel's gaze softened, and for the briefest moment, his intense expression faltered. But just as quickly, it was replaced with the same steely resolve that had made him a legend. "This will not be the end of you," he said, his voice a promise, a vow. "You will stand beside me, Caroline. You will be more than you ever imagined." The flames, which had once threatened to consume her, now seemed to burn with a different intensity, one that matched the fire in her heart. The Alpha King had chosen her, and in that moment, Caroline Whitmore knew that her life would never be the same again. Caroline stood still, the weight of the Alpha King's words still ringing in her ears. She could feel the power in them, the promise of something more. The fire behind them flickered as if an acknowledgement, as if the flames themselves had heard Nathaniel's declaration. Slowly, the tension in the air began to lift, and the murmurs from the crowd began to fade. For a moment, it was just Caroline and the Alpha King, standing side by side, both locked in an unspoken understanding. The Alpha King, Nathaniel Thornridge, looked down at her with a quiet intensity, his silver eyes reflecting the fire's light. She had never felt so vulnerable, so exposed, but in his presence, she didn't feel fear. Instead, she felt the faintest spark of hope. The kind of hope that had been buried deep inside her for years, a hope she had long ago abandoned. She had been cast aside by her own pack, looked down upon for being the Omega who couldn't shift, for being weak. She had been the one left behind, the one ignored. But now, standing beside the Alpha King, she felt seen. For the first time in her life, someone had chosen her. And it wasn't just anyone. It was Nathaniel Thornridge, the Alpha King of the Northern Territories. The man who commanded the respect and fear of all those who crossed his path. The man who had the power to change her life. His presence beside her was unlike anything she had ever known. His strength, his confidence, it was palpable, filling the air around them. Caroline couldn't help but feel a strange sense of peace in his company, as though the very world had shifted, giving her a place where she finally belonged. The silence between them stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Nathaniel's gaze softened, just slightly, as he looked down at her, and for the first time, Caroline saw something in his eyes that she hadn't expected: compassion. "You are more than they ever saw in you," Nathaniel said, his voice low but steady, his words carrying a weight that seemed to settle over her. "I see you, Caroline. Not as the broken Omega they tried to make you believe you were, but as the woman you truly are. And I will not let them take that from you." His words wrapped around her like a warm blanket, and for a fleeting moment, Caroline let herself believe them. She had always been the one to hide in the shadows, to shrink away from attention. But now, standing at the center of the pack, with the Alpha King at her side, she couldn't help but wonder if this was truly the start of something new. "Thank you," she whispered, the words barely leaving her lips before she realized they were true. She wasn't just thanking him for his protection, for his declaration. She was thanking him for seeing her, for acknowledging her worth in a way that no one ever had before. Nathaniel gave a small nod, the corner of his lips lifting just slightly. "You don't need to thank me," he said, his voice softening. "This is where you belong, Caroline. By my side, as my Luna." The words hit her like a thunderclap, a surge of emotion sweeping through her. The idea of being his Luna, his mate, was something she had never dared to dream of. Yet here she was, standing beside him, no longer alone, no longer cast aside. It felt surreal, as if the world itself had shifted in her favor. The crowd was still silent, the tension hanging thick in the air, but now there was something different. Respect. Awe. Fear. They had all witnessed the Alpha King's decision, and no one dared challenge him. Caroline could feel their gazes, but she didn't care. Not anymore. She was no longer the broken Omega. She was the chosen one, the one who would stand beside the Alpha King. As Nathaniel placed his hand gently on her shoulder, Caroline felt the weight of the world lift off her. She had a place now, a purpose. And with Nathaniel at her side, she knew she would never be overlooked again. Caroline stood beside Nathaniel, feeling the weight of the moment settle over her. The heat of the judgment pyre had faded, but the intensity of the crowd's gaze still hung heavy in the air. She could feel their eyes on her, some filled with admiration, others with confusion, but none with the scorn she had grown so used to. Nathaniel's presence beside her was like an anchor, a steady force that kept her grounded in this new reality. Her heart raced as the realization of what had just happened began to settle in. She was no longer the rejected Omega, the one who had been cast aside by her own pack. Now, she was standing at the side of the Alpha King, a man whose power and influence extended over the entire northern territories. Nathaniel's hand on her shoulder was a constant reminder of his words. She was his Luna, his chosen mate. It was a concept that seemed so foreign to her, yet it felt more real with each passing moment. She glanced up at him, meeting his silver eyes, and for the first time, she didn't see the king who commanded armies and ruled with unyielding authority. She saw the man who had chosen her, the one who had seen something in her that no one else had. "You're not alone anymore, Caroline," Nathaniel said quietly, his voice a low murmur that only she could hear. "You never will be again." His words were simple, but they carried a weight that filled her chest with warmth. She had spent so many years alone, hidden in the shadows of her pack, that the idea of having someone stand by her side, especially someone like Nathaniel, felt surreal. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The words didn't seem like enough, but they were all she could offer in this moment. Nathaniel's gaze softened, and he gave a small nod. "You don't need to thank me," he replied, his tone gentle but firm. "This is what you deserve. This is where you belong." As he spoke, the crowd began to disperse, their murmurs fading into the background as they went about their business. But Caroline didn't move. She stayed by Nathaniel's side, the weight of the moment still pressing down on her. It was a feeling she wasn't used to, the feeling of being seen, of being valued. And it was all because of him. The Alpha King had not only defended her in front of the entire pack, but he had also declared her his equal, his mate. Caroline knew that this was only the beginning. There would be challenges ahead, no doubt, but for the first time in her life, she felt ready to face them. Nathaniel's presence gave her strength, a strength she hadn't known she possessed. "I know this isn't going to be easy," Nathaniel continued, his voice low and steady. "But we'll face it together. You and I." Caroline nodded, her heart swelling with emotion she couldn't quite put into words. Together. The word felt right. It felt like something she had been waiting for her entire life. "Together," she repeated, the word tasting like a promise, a vow. Nathaniel gave her a small smile, the corners of his lips lifting just slightly. "Good," he said. "Now, let's go. There's much to be done, and I have a feeling we'll be doing it side by side from now on." As he turned to lead her away from the pyre, Caroline couldn't help but feel a sense of hope rise within her. For the first time in years, she felt like her future was something she could take control of. And with Nathaniel by her side, she knew that whatever came next, she would face it with strength and determination. She was no longer the broken Omega. She was Caroline Whitmore, the Luna of the Alpha King. Caroline followed Nathaniel through the winding corridors of the royal citadel, her heart still racing from the events that had unfolded earlier. The heavy silence that had once consumed her now seemed like a distant memory, replaced by a new sense of purpose. She was no longer just an Omega. She was his Luna. The weight of that title settled over her, heavy yet empowering, and for the first time in her life, she felt as though she truly belonged. Nathaniel moved with a purposeful stride, his presence commanding attention even in the quiet halls of the citadel. As they walked, Caroline couldn't help but steal glances at him, studying the man who had just turned her entire world upside down. His features were sharp, regal, and there was an intensity in his gaze that made her both nervous and excited. He had been the one to give her the strength to stand before the flames, to face the rejection of her pack, and to believe in herself. She was no longer invisible. But she was also aware that this was just the beginning. She was stepping into a new life, a life that came with its own challenges and responsibilities. "You're quiet," Nathaniel's voice broke through her thoughts, pulling her back to the present. Caroline looked up at him, her heart skipping a beat as she met his silver eyes. "Just thinking," she said softly, her voice betraying the mix of emotions swirling within her. "About what?" he asked, his tone gentle, though there was an underlying curiosity. Caroline hesitated for a moment, wondering if she should voice the questions that had been plaguing her since the moment Nathaniel had claimed her as his Luna. "What happens now?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do I do now?" Nathaniel stopped in his tracks, turning to face her. For a brief moment, his usual confidence faltered, and something softer, more vulnerable, shone in his eyes. "Now," he began, his voice steady but with an undertone of something deeper, "you take your place beside me. You are my Luna. That is who you are now, Caroline. That is your role." Caroline's breath caught in her throat as his words sank in. She had always imagined a life of quiet submission, hidden away in the shadows, never daring to dream of something greater. But now, Nathaniel was offering her more than just a title. He was offering her a partnership. A chance to stand beside him as an equal, to have a voice in the decisions that shaped their world. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. "But what if I'm not ready?" she asked, her uncertainty creeping into her words. Nathaniel's expression softened, and he took a step closer to her. "You are more than ready," he said, his hand reaching out to gently touch her arm, a silent reassurance. "You have always been ready. It was just waiting for the right moment." Caroline swallowed the lump in her throat, her heart swelling with emotion she didn't know how to express. The weight of her past, the years of rejection and isolation, seemed to melt away in that moment. Here she was, standing beside the Alpha King, no longer invisible, no longer broken. "I don't know what the future holds," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm ready to find out." Nathaniel gave her a small, approving smile, and with that, they continued their walk. As they turned the corner, Caroline felt a new sense of confidence rise within her. She had no idea what challenges lay ahead, but one thing was certain, she wasn't facing them alone. Nathaniel was by her side, and with him, she knew she could face anything. For the first time in her life, Caroline felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. As Caroline stepped further into the grand halls of the royal citadel, a new sense of purpose settled within her. The echo of her footsteps, once timid and uncertain, now seemed filled with strength, a quiet confidence that she had never known before. Nathaniel walked beside her, his presence like a pillar of power and assurance. His silence, though, was not one of distance but of understanding, as if he, too, was contemplating the future that awaited them. The weight of her new title as Luna seemed to follow her with every step, a constant reminder of the changes in her life. She had once been an outcast, the Omega who had never belonged, but now she was standing beside the most powerful man in the land, his equal. It was a lot to process. They arrived at a large chamber, its high ceilings and grand decor overwhelming. The room was bathed in the warm glow of candles and torches, the flickering light casting long shadows on the stone walls. Caroline looked around, feeling both small and important in this vast space. "This is where we will meet with the council," Nathaniel said, his voice calm and steady, breaking the silence that had settled between them. Caroline nodded, though a knot of nervousness tightened in her stomach. She had always been used to being overlooked, never considered worthy of attention. But now, as Luna, her voice would matter. "I'm not sure what to expect," she admitted, glancing up at Nathaniel. "I've never been part of something so official. I've always been the one watching from the sidelines. Nathaniel gave her a reassuring look. You are no longer on the sidelines, Caroline. You are by my side, and that is where you will remain. The council will listen to you, just as they listen to me. You have as much a say in this as I do. His words were firm, yet there was a gentleness to them, a promise that she would never again feel invisible. Caroline took a deep breath, her nerves slowly settling. She had come so far, from the girl who had been cast aside to the woman standing beside the Alpha King. The room was soon filled with a group of people, each one with a different expression. Some were familiar to Caroline, figures she had seen in passing but never truly interacted with. Others were strangers, their eyes curious as they observed her. The moment Nathaniel entered, however, the room fell into a respectful silence. All eyes turned toward him, and as he moved to take his seat, Caroline followed his lead, taking her place beside him. We are here to discuss matters of great importance, Nathaniel began, his voice commanding yet calm. But before we begin, I want to introduce you all to my Luna, Caroline Whitmore. She will be by my side in all matters, and I expect the same respect to be shown to her as is shown to me. Caroline could feel the weight of every gaze in the room, but instead of retreating into the shadows, she held her head high. She was no longer the outsider, no longer the one to be dismissed. She was his equal, and she would make her voice heard. The council members exchanged glances, some nodding in acknowledgement, others with a look of surprise. But none dared challenge Nathaniel's words. As the meeting continued, Caroline found herself speaking more than she had anticipated. Her ideas, her thoughts, were met with nods of approval, and she could feel the shift within her. She was no longer afraid to share what was on her mind. The conversation shifted to matters of diplomacy, trade, and security, and Caroline contributed her thoughts with increasing confidence. Nathaniel remained by her side, his silent support bolstering her as she spoke. When the meeting finally came to a close, Caroline felt a sense of accomplishment wash over her. She had done it. She had not only survived the council's scrutiny but had earned their respect. As the last of the council members left the room, Nathaniel turned to her, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. You did well today, he said quietly. I knew you would. Caroline smiled, her heart swelling with pride. Thank you, she said, the words feeling more genuine than she had ever imagined. I didn't realize how much I had to offer until today. Nathaniel nodded, his expression softening. You've always had it within you, Caroline. I'm just glad you can see it now. As they left the room together, Caroline couldn't help but feel the weight of her new life settle on her with a sense of purpose. The future was uncertain, but with Nathaniel by her side, she knew she was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. She was no longer just an Omega. She was Caroline Whitmore, Luna of the Alpha King, and her voice would be heard. As days passed, Caroline's life at the Royal Citadel began to settle into a new rhythm. The initial shock of her new role as Luna had begun to fade, replaced by a growing sense of responsibility. Every day, she found herself learning more about the complexities of her position, the expectations placed upon her, and the delicate balance she had to maintain. Nathaniel, ever the supportive partner, guided her through it all with a steady hand. His presence, once imposing and distant, had become a constant source of reassurance. He never once treated her as anything less than his equal, and with each passing day, Caroline felt herself rising to meet the challenges before her. The council meetings became less intimidating, and the pack's respect for her grew as she proved herself time and time again. But it wasn't just the political duties that weighed on her mind. Caroline also found herself grappling with the quiet, personal moments with Nathaniel, moments where she had to confront the growing bond between them. She had always known her life would change the moment she stood by his side, but the depth of the connection they shared was something she hadn't expected. At first, it had been subtle, a flicker of warmth whenever he was near, a feeling of comfort in his presence. But over time, those moments began to grow into something more, something undeniable. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Caroline found herself in the gardens, the cool evening air brushing against her skin. She had come to the gardens to clear her mind, to escape the weight of her responsibilities for just a moment. As she walked among the flowers, her thoughts turned inward, and she couldn't help but wonder about the bond Nathaniel had spoken of. What did it truly mean to be his Luna? Was it simply a title, a position of power, or was it something deeper? Caroline didn't know the answers, but the uncertainty gnawed at her. She was interrupted from her thoughts by the sound of footsteps behind her. She turned to see Nathaniel approaching, his silhouette framed by the light of the setting sun. He looked at her with an expression that was both warm and contemplative, as though he had been thinking the same thoughts. "Caroline," he said softly, his voice cutting through the silence. "You seem distant. What's on your mind?" Caroline hesitated for a moment before responding. She had always been honest with Nathaniel, but this was different. This was personal, and she wasn't sure how to articulate the questions swirling in her mind. "I've been thinking about us," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "About what it means to be Luna. I know what it looks like, what the title means, but I don't know what it means for me. For us." Nathaniel's gaze softened, and he took a step closer to her, his presence reassuring. "You are more than just my Luna, Caroline," he said, his voice low and sincere. "You are my equal in every way. You are the heart of this pack, and I will never ask you to be anything less than who you are. Together, we are stronger. That is the true meaning of this bond." Caroline felt a wave of emotion wash over her as his words sank in. She had always feared that she would be expected to sacrifice herself, to lose who she was in the name of duty. But Nathaniel's words were a promise, a reassurance that she would never have to lose herself to fit into this new life. "Thank you," she said quietly, her heart swelling with gratitude. Nathaniel smiled, his eyes full of understanding. "You don't have to thank me. Just know that I am here for you, always. Whatever comes, we will face it together." Caroline smiled back, her heart lighter than it had been in weeks. She realized that, despite the uncertainties, she had found a partner in Nathaniel. Not just a king, but a man who saw her for who she truly was, and who valued her for it. The bond between them was not just a title, not just a duty, it was a partnership, one built on mutual respect and understanding. As they stood together in the quiet of the garden, Caroline knew that this was only the beginning of their journey. The path ahead would not always be easy, but with Nathaniel by her side, she felt ready to face whatever came next. Caroline awoke to the soft light of dawn filtering through the tall windows of the royal chambers. The warmth of the sun contrasted with the coolness of the stone beneath her, and for a moment, she allowed herself to bask in the quiet. The world outside was still, and in this stillness, Caroline found a rare moment of peace. It had been weeks since she had been named Luna, and in that time, she had adjusted to the weight of her new life. The complexities of her responsibilities, the expectations placed upon her, and the growing bond between her and Nathaniel had become part of her reality. But this morning, as she lay in the soft sheets of the royal bed, she realized something that had slowly been taking shape inside her. She was beginning to embrace the life she had been given. The life she had once believed was out of reach. Slowly, she rose from the bed, the familiar soft rustle of the sheets settling as she moved. She dressed in a simple gown, a pale blue fabric that matched the clear sky outside. It was a far cry from the tattered clothes she once wore in her old pack, clothes that had been a constant reminder of her status as an Omega. Now, as Luna, she wore her new title not just in the clothes she donned, but in the way she carried herself. As she made her way through the corridors, her thoughts turned to Nathaniel. The Alpha King had been more than just a ruler to her, he had become her partner, her equal. Every day, he had shown her the true meaning of their bond. It wasn't just about titles or power. It was about trust, respect, and a shared journey. Nathaniel had never once treated her as anything less than his equal. He had given her a place by his side, not as a decoration or a figurehead, but as a woman with a voice and a purpose. As she reached the garden where they often met, Caroline spotted Nathaniel standing near the fountain. His silver eyes were focused on the water, his expression contemplative. She approached him quietly, not wanting to disturb his thoughts. But when Nathaniel heard her footsteps, he turned, his gaze softening as he met her eyes. "Good morning," he said, his voice low and warm. Caroline smiled, feeling the familiar rush of affection for him. "Good morning," she replied. I didn't mean to interrupt your thoughts. Nathaniel shook his head, his lips curving into a smile. You could never interrupt me, he said, his voice filled with sincerity. I was just thinking about the future. Caroline joined him by the fountain, the sound of the water adding to the peaceful atmosphere of the morning. What about the future? She asked, her curiosity piqued. About everything we've built, Nathaniel said, his eyes meeting hers. And everything we will continue to build, together. Caroline's heart swelled at his words. They had come a long way from the first day they had met, from the moment when she had stood at the judgment pyre, uncertain of her place in the world. Now, standing beside Nathaniel, she knew that she had a future where she was not just his Luna, but his partner in every sense. I never thought I would have this, Caroline admitted, her voice soft. A future, a place where I belong. Nathaniel reached out, taking her hand in his. You've always belonged, Caroline. You just needed to see it for yourself. Caroline squeezed his hand, feeling the warmth of his touch spread through her. I'm glad I can see it now, she said, her heart full of gratitude. I'm glad I'm here with you. Nathaniel smiled, his eyes shining with affection. And I'm glad you're here with me. The two of them stood in the quiet of the garden, the early morning light casting long shadows around them. In that moment, Caroline knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. They had already overcome so much, and with Nathaniel by her side, she was ready for whatever the future held. The bond between them was unbreakable, built on a foundation of trust, respect, and love. Caroline had found her place, and it was exactly where she was meant to be, with Nathaniel, at his side, as his Luna. As the days passed, Caroline's new life alongside Nathaniel began to take shape more clearly. The first few weeks had been filled with meetings, decisions, and new responsibilities, but now, there was a rhythm to it all. She had become more than just a figure beside the Alpha King, she had become an active participant in shaping the future of the pack. The weight of her new role had slowly settled into her, not as a burden, but as a purpose. Yet, even with all the new challenges and duties, Caroline still found herself marveling at the bond she shared with Nathaniel. It wasn't just the strength he had shown her, it was his patience, his understanding, and the way he made her feel like an equal. There were moments when she would catch him watching her, his eyes soft and full of affection, and in those moments, she couldn't help but feel that everything was finally falling into place. One evening, after a long day of council meetings, Caroline found herself once again in the royal gardens, where she had spent many quiet moments with Nathaniel. The night air was cool, a gentle breeze rustling the leaves of the trees around her. She took a deep breath, the scent of flowers and earth grounding her as she made her way to their usual spot by the fountain. Nathaniel was already there, standing tall with his back to her, his gaze focused on the water. As she approached, he turned to face her, a small smile forming on his lips. I thought I'd find you here, he said, his voice low and comforting. Caroline smiled back, feeling the warmth spread through her. It's the only place where I can think clearly, she replied, settling beside him. Nathaniel nodded, his expression softening as he looked at her. I know what you mean. Sometimes, I come here just to clear my head. There was a pause, and Caroline could feel the weight of his words. The responsibilities of being an Alpha King were never far from his mind, and she could see the toll it sometimes took on him. But he never showed it. How are you feeling about everything? Nathaniel asked, his gaze meeting hers, searching for any sign of doubt or fear. Caroline hesitated, but only for a moment. She had spent so much of her life questioning her worth, her place in the world, but now she knew that she was where she was meant to be. I'm ready, she said, her voice steady, though it held a depth of emotion. I'm ready to do this. To stand by your side. Nathaniel's eyes softened, and he reached out, his hand brushing hers in. A gentle gesture of reassurance. You're more than ready, Caroline, he said, his voice filled with sincerity. You have been from the start. I couldn't do this without you. Caroline's heart fluttered at his words, and she turned her hand, letting their fingers intertwine. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes. It was a promise, a silent vow to face whatever came next together. They stood in silence for a while, the sound of the water flowing in the background as the moonlight bathed the garden in a soft glow. Caroline's thoughts turned to the future, to all the challenges that still lay ahead. She knew it wouldn't be easy. There would be struggles, disagreements, and sacrifices. But she also knew that with Nathaniel by her side, they could face anything. Together, they were unstoppable. As the night wore on, the moon rising higher in the sky, Caroline felt a sense of peace settle over her. She had found her place. Not just as Nathaniel's Luna, but as a partner in every sense of the word. And for the first time in her life, she truly felt like she belonged.